Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guest today is Jamison Braun, the Vice President of Global Public Sector at Salesforce. Jamison, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Anastasia.
Of course. A lot to talk about here. Let's start with the state of IT modernization at the Defense Department. Could you talk to some of the challenges that the Defense Department faces as it continues to modernize, and especially given all the initiatives and efforts it has going on, whether it's C-JET, C2, whether it's adoption of AI across the military services, or enhancing cybersecurity, reforming software acquisition processes, you name it.
Normally, the Defense Department is always a laggard in the space compared to its commercial counterparts. First and foremost, I think it's just because of the added accreditation, certifications, and scrutiny that we place to protect not only our infrastructure and our operational domains, but certainly the privacy and security of all of the employees that we have underneath that framework. I think I'd like to start with kind of the modernization itself, which is, data in silos. So, there's structured data, there's unstructured data. We've got legacy and monolith systems that exist way back into COBOL-based code in the 1950s that make up a majority of still our pay systems that we leverage today. And then as you go across this journey, now you have 6 generations that exist within the labor pool. So in each one of those has a different way of interacting with, the Defense Department and have different experiences and expectations. So, and if you use an example like you and I, right, our generation is now used to having this iPhone, right, or this Android that has all of our creature comforts, what I call thin work, so at our disposal all the time. And the reality is the Defense Department just hasn't caught up to that seamless integration of our personal life and our professional life.
All right, a lot to unpack there, but let's talk about, when you think about digital modernization, what does it look like from a maturity perspective? Let's start there.
So I like the maturity model because it gives you a launch point by which you can really start to engage with. I really think it's surrounds by about 5 different elements. The first one is I think that everybody ought to lead with insights, or lead with data. And by that I mean the ability first to unlock the data that you have in all the different warehouses or silos or locations or warehouses, but then to be able to actually see it and visualize it. So it's twofold, unlocking existing data and then the visualization aspect. Once you lead with data every single day, I think the next aspect is you have to be able to do something with it. So it's not enough to just admire the problem or operational voyeurism, right? We need to be able to take action and solve a problem. So this is what I call the XRM layer. And XRM could be case management, it could be filing for benefits and taking action, it could be servicing issues like mobile workers taking actions on operational equipment, so in the field. Could be any one of those things, but that's what I call the XRM layer. And then I think the third layer of the maturity model is really end-to-end human capital. So I think that you need to create this engagement layer, this journey of people and the way that our people are retained and engaged across the entire ecosystem. So end-to-end, from identifying prospects and reaching out to future people that demonstrate a propensity to want to serve, all the way to indemnity and identification, which is after somebody is deceased, how do you continue to take care of their survivors and benefits? So, and then after you do that, my fourth layer in the maturity model is what I call SRM. So it could just as well be, the operational execution, embedding data into that element, but it's supply chain, it's resource management, it's asset management, inventory management, all the ways that we take care of systems. Think much bigger than, information technology systems. Think logistics and readiness and operational and aircraft generation equipment, all the ways that we execute the mission of the department. And then the fifth piece of the maturity model is what I call really revolutionizing the work operating system. So wrapping all of that into this single platform to where people can stay in the flow of work. And I like to say, stop being a swivel servant, which is today, I'm over here in one application, I swivel to another application with a login and password, I jump to another application, and none of them are ever connected. So if you can stay in that flow of work, wrap everything that we just talked about of the first 4 elements of the maturity model into a work operating system, that's where you really start to get business outcomes.
Okay, a lot to dive in there. Let's start with leading with insights. Could you elaborate on that? But also, what advice would you have for defense organizations when it comes to identifying and collecting insights more effectively? And also, could you talk about organizations doing it very well, maybe some successful examples?
Sure. So I think that as a baseline, there's two elements of data, right? One is structured data. So these are bits and bytes, the things that we normally capture in old data warehouses. So if I was in the Defense Department, things like name, rank, serial number, color of your hair, right? All of these things are just bits and bytes that we plug in as we assess you along the way. There's a whole bunch of things that we do that are in the unstructured data environment. So these are PDFs, these are old documents, right, that still haven't even been digitized yet. These are maps, as an example. If you're, garnering intelligence from above and, drones and unmanned aerial vehicles, those types of things are unstructured data elements. So first is the ability to know where these reside. So, and they don't have to reside in a perfect place, right? We've done a lot of work on data warehouses and data lakes, and right, you've heard these over the last 10 years as people start to modernize. But they just need to have access to them. That's the very first piece. Once you have access to them, then what we do is we shift the conversation. And we shift the conversation to one that used to be purely subjective. It was based on the 30-year colonel or the 30-year general or the 30-year chief, right, or the sergeant major, who had experience that he would overlay and create a subjective opinion on what he thought based on the experiences. We shift from that mindset to leveraging data to become an objective conversation. And essentially, you elevate and mature the conversation that you're having. So an anecdote would be, I spent my entire career in the Department of the Air Force, and there was always this creative tension that existed between the operator and the maintainer. So the operator's sole job in life was to train pilots to be able to drop kinetic and non-kinetic effects into the war zone. So, but the operator was always frustrated with the maintainer. Why isn't the jet ready? How come I can't get enough flying hours? The maintainer, on the adverse, was always frustrated with, I can never maintain my planes because you're always flying them, or you're too hard on them, or there's too much wind shear or strain, any of those elements. And the wing commanders would never understand who was right in a situation. But by leveraging data as the common element, in this case, in the SRM model of maturity, we can make objective decisions. So the reason that this plane is unable to fly is because something is held up in the procurement or acquisition or inventory management system, or because we flew an in-flight emergency light that popped on, right? We're elevating the conversation to be data-driven and data-centric. So that's one example. Let me give you another one that I think really ties into the resilience of our force, which is somebody like the Army and Air Force Exchange Service System. So when we go downrange in deployed locations, what used to happen is AFIs used to send a Connex or a big kind of like a sundry store, but it was a basic kit because they weren't leveraging data for the buying power and the propensity of garrison installations. So if I was in Fort Drum, New York, as an example, and I'm buying certain things, you can imagine that that type of clientele is a little bit different than Fort Hood in Texas. So, and what AFIS has now done has tied the garrison buying habits, leveraging data, so on a daily basis, and when they find out that a unit is getting ready to deploy from that given location, they tie those data elements to the ordering system of what they place in that Connex, so that when those troops get downrange, or those soldiers, or those airmen, or those guardians, they have all the creature comforts of what they're used to buying at home. So I think that's a powerful data story of leading from the front.
Absolutely. And that's one piece of it. One thing I wanted to follow up on is you talked about end-to-end human capital, and where we're at today is we are having layoffs at the Defense Department. So could you talk to that piece? This is the reality that people are dealing with and will be dealing with for years to come. So could you talk about that piece and what your advice would be there?
So I think it's not new. I think that we see these things happen. If you look at the last 7 administrations, we've seen these ebbs and flows of layoffs and restructuring and transformation internal to the government. I think where we see ourselves now is right in a new era where we are not actively engaged in a decisive conflict. So in my lifetime, I was 17 years of constant war, right? And now we have about 7 years of almost perpetual peace, or this stand-up of readiness and transformation. When you do that, there's the employee engagement layer. So when we talk end-to-end human capital, right? How do you keep your employees engaged? How do you make sure that we're recruiting the right types of people? So in placing them into service. And while attrition naturally will take place, right, we need to make sure that we keep those people engaged. And one of the ways that we do it is reduce the friction in their daily lives. So this idea of being the swivel servant, right, is one. Here's another anecdote for you where we talk about the maturity model and really leveraging this data. Imagine every time that you go to a medical appointment in the service. So for one that you scheduled online, leveraging the data that they had about you, and then you arrive at the reception desk and they hand you a piece of paper and say, please fill out your name, birth date, and identification number. Right? Little things like that. Or more importantly, when we talk about being able to roll up the true power of what is like customer relationship management, think of all the different ways that I capture information on you. As an example, every year you're required to do an annual physical evaluation test, right? Where you go demonstrate your physical acumen, for physical training. So in that we measure your height, your weight, your waist size, right? All the things that are important for you. So, but we don't connect it to the logistics and supply chain system. So as an example, so then I get notified that I have to deploy. We talked about those connexes. So I have to go to a remote location, which often requires a different set of uniforms. And now what we do in the Defense Department, because we don't leverage the data, we send the soldier to a specific central issuing facility where they will wait for several hours for their name to be called to find out that the boots and the uniform and the mask and all of their equipment may or may not even be available in their size. So now imagine if we could leverage the data that we have of what exists in human capital, connect it to the logistics and supply chain ordering system, and make an Amazon-like experience that just drop ships the right size at the right time overnight for the individual the minute that they've been identified for service.
What kind of business outcomes could organizations expect?
So I love the question because I think it falls right in line with T47's objectives on government efficiency and productivity, right? So the first thing is you get both of those things, right? By leveraging data, you remove a lot of the fog that exists in the information technology system. So 2 is it reduces the friction for the people themselves, so it increases your employee engagement. And 3, it allows you to move faster, which I think is critical for the speed of mission that we're at. I used to work for General Todd Walters, who was the Supreme Allied Commander of Europe at NATO, and he used to always say, work at the speed of relevance. So, which I think was apropos, because now when we talk about the role that defense plays, right, the speed of mission is even more critical. So we have to give the right insights to the right decision maker as fast as possible, which I think is a great segue on the way that we communicate. And today, we don't really leverage data. The way that the systems are structured is in a linear fashion. So it's an email passed as a task received, right? But often, because of the way that the hierarchy is built, we start at the very top. So maybe the chairman of the Joint Chiefs or the service chief or the secretary has the information they need, and it takes a very long time to go through the echelons of command to get down to the tactical level worker. Imagine if we had a way to communicate, collaborate, and document, so in that flow of work, that could go right to every single person at the decision maker level, where they had the insights that they needed, they had the relative background that they need for business continuity, and they could enact on decisions, and everybody had 3 critical variables: trust, transparency, and accountability, all in system that becomes your business continuity. So back to human capital, in a stage where you were talking about, what are some of the business outcomes? Imagine if I could onboard somebody by leveraging that same work operating system, keep people in the flow of work, and they would have the entire continuity of the unit that they're starting to onboard with. And imagine if we could leverage autonomous agents or artificial intelligence to synthesize and summarize years or decades worth of that information and give it to them in a very simple, easy to read and digest format. So that's what we're doing now in our company, but these are some of the things that the Defense Department can start to garner real efficiencies from.
Well, let's talk about leveraging AI. Could you talk to some of the ways that the Defense Department is currently doing that? Could you share some of the examples of how they're using AI successfully? For example, I had an interview with CENTCOM last week. What they're doing right now is they're working on becoming self-service when it comes to AI. So they're kind of pioneers in that space, and they're kind of paving the way for other combatant commands. Those are some exciting things that they're doing. But could you also talk to what the potential is for autonomous assistive AI agents to transform operations in the future?
So let's start with the baseline again, right? So similar to having 5 levels of maturity that we talk about for digital modernization, I think we're in the 3rd wave of AI. So, and I think it's important that we understand where defense sits in those. So the first wave was really predictive analytics, right? Imagine it was a historical record by leveraging some data set that told us about what already happened. We called it predictive, but really we just wanted an insight so that we could try to figure out what not to do the next time. The second is really what we're talking about today, right? In the landscape of defense and federal entities, which is the generative AI piece, which is a chatbot-like function. So the ability to reach into multiple data layers, pull out a specific element, and guide or direct the human to go further. As an example, right, if it was a restaurant, right, and I wanted to schedule something at a restaurant, the example would be, here's the telephone number for that restaurant, right? But now it falls back to me as the human. I have the telephone number. I now need to take action. The third wave, which is where our company really excels right now in full production, is in the autonomous agent. The autonomous agent is different from the second phase of ChatGPT-like because it can actually take the action. So back to our restaurant example, imagine if I say, I'd really like a cozy restaurant, dinner for 2, 7 p.m. The autonomous agent can reply back and say, Jamison, I found 3 in Washington, D.C. that I think perfectly match it. They all have availability tonight at 7 p.m. Which one would you like to go to? And I reply back, I'd like to go to choose the restaurant. And the autonomous agent then replies back, Jamison, I have made the confirmation for you. So essentially, I, as the human, have had to do very little. Now let's translate this into defense. In the Defense Department, we run 10,000 probably contact centers. I can only speak for the Department of the Air Force, where we ran about 3,200 just all across different variables. But imagine that every one of those contact centers has human people who are trying to decipher on a daily basis the same monotonous questions, back to employee engagement. Am I eligible for this thing, right? Am I entitled to this benefit? How do I apply for an exceptional family member program? How do I apply for a hardship reassignment? When is my physical fitness test due, right? Am I authorized to wear this on my uniform? These are all examples of monotonous things that contact centers constantly are having to deal with. Now imagine that I can train an autonomous agent to look through all of the regulations, directives, periodicals, updated executive orders, right? All of the regulation, and immediately decipher what the right answer is while establishing guardrails, so to remove hallucinations and toxicity and things that would make it risky to answer the question, right? But then tie a bow around it so that it gets refined over and over and over again. And I can restrict the data elements that it looks at. So it's not looking at, say, the Canadian Armed Forces or the Australian Armed Forces or the Japanese Armed Forces. It's only limited to that single environment. So what essentially I can do is I can then create this revolution of digital labor where these autonomous agents can work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, which is what we can't do as humans. We already have the labor shortage, you mentioned this. But imagine now when I get off my 12-hour shift as a security forces guy, that I can go home and I can answer the question and the autonomous agent can get me the answer, and I don't have to go stand in line at a reception or wait online on a telephone call. All of these things start to increase the employee engagement that we have. And this is really revolutionizing this idea of digital labor. You could also use this in the battle space. So an example that we use to help with the Ukrainian conflict right now is we're tracking, well, not we, but the North Atlantic Treaty Organization is tracking air flights that are happening all over European airspace. And imagine that there's hundreds of thousands of these things that happen every single day. The ability for the human eye, the human mind, to identify anomalies in these air traffic patterns is super complex. But we can train an autonomous agent to look at those over and over and over and over again and identify anomalies. That one jet that went 40 minutes out of its way suddenly becomes a risk, right? Or something that we need to dive deeper into. So there's an example of where we place it immediately in the operational domain.
And what your advice would be for the Defense Department as they're preparing for that transition?
First and foremost, don't DIY your AI. So what we are really good at in the Defense Department is being a profession of arms. And I want to equate it to another profession, which could be the profession of law or the profession of medicine. We're really good at understanding battlefields and waging war or perpetuating peace, right? Kind of two sides of the coin. What we don't have time for, sadly, is enough white space to learn all of the things that the commercial sector is already learned or has already learned in the development of autonomous agents and artificial intelligence. So I want to give you an example. I was just recently with the CEO of RBC Bank, which is a big bank it's the largest bank in all of Canada. So when the CEO was telling me the story, he says, Jamison, I hired 100 PhDs, 100 PhDs to all build our large language model to make banking smoother and simpler, right, at a more rapid pace, because it's about differentiation, competitive advantage. We want to be even a bigger bank. We want everybody to trust us. He says, they've been working on it for over a year. I've spent probably several $10, $20 million paying for this and all of these advanced technologies. And I was not able to achieve the same AI difference that you gave us in 5 weeks via the platform. 100 PhDs. That's another example of a very distinguished individual for the Air Force PEO down in Maxwell Gunther. He hired 3 subcontracting firms, paid them over $1 million apiece over the course of a year, and still don't have any viable capability for artificial intelligence. So don't DIY your AI. Leverage the great classical examples. And I want to give you another anecdote, as we're getting off the stage here. When you think about thin work and the ways that you like to integrate your own personal life, right? If you're thinking about moving a mass number of people, who does it better than organizations like the airlines, right? It could be United, Delta, Lufthansa, Etihad, British Airways, right? They all leverage a commercial platform. Now, conveniently, they also leverage our platform, but they all leverage that type of thing. And if you're going to bed down forces, who does that better than the Marriotts and the Hiltons and the Hyatts and the Intercontinental Hotels? And if you're going to track massive projects or packages, who does it better than the U.S. Postal Service, UPS, DHL, and FedEx? These are all examples of people that have leveraged a platform-based approach, starting with data, providing truth, transparency, and accountability to the end user, and all made it super easy to use. Imagine if just the Defense Department could start leveraging that type of out-of-the-box capability with rapid implementation. And Secretary Higgs, just passed or just reiterated on the Software Acquisition Framework memo, right? Now is a great time. Let's stop trying to build, don't DIY your AI. Let's reduce the friction internally for our employees, and let's start doing more with less for government, and now you can with autonomous agents.
Before I let you go, because we're about to run out of time, I wanted to quickly talk to you about your government cloud premium. Could you talk about some of the benefits that it offers to defense agencies, and how also it aligns with modernization priorities?
We're making a deliberate investment in Salesforce. We started as one cloud, which is why Salesforce really doesn't resonate in the Defense Department, let alone the public sector. But we started as the single most important variable, which was understanding who you were, right? This was the Salesforce element. Over the course of time, we made very strategic acquisitions and mergers of different products, right? Things like Tableau for insights, MuleSoft for API integration, Slack as an example for that work operating system. But we also made deliberate investments in 15 industry clouds. So we run a health cloud, we run a public sector solutions, where we have flattened the timeline that it takes for places like the Defense Department to do implementation, because we have built in the lexicons and the terminologies and the nomenclatures that you need to do your work. So you're not having to reconfigure things like skill. Instead, it's already built in that you can drop down for military operating specialty, MOS, or naval experience classification, the NECs, or the Air Force specialty classification, AFSC. So we've built those types of things into our industry level clouds. And we have those in energy, we have those in manufacturing, we have those in auto, health cloud, and public sector solutions that we use. Already things like end-to-end talent marketplace, right? So it's already built in as a module. You don't have to do a configuration. Licensing, permitting, and inspection. If you're sending guys out to do, inspections on, food or construction facilities, if you're the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, those types of things. So that's one element, is we co-invest and deliver this capability for rapid implementation. The second is we're very deliberate in the way that we build technical architecture. So to your question on GovCloud Premium, we've made sure that we've partnered with the Googles and the Amazon Web Services to deliver not only the external perimeter, but also all of the certifications and accreditations that you need to operate in the operational space. So GovCloud Premium, we have a sponsor that works in the intelligence community that spends a lot of time in the top secret environment. So we've been co-investing with them to make sure that we are delivering that at speed and at scale so that they can continue to deliver on their operational mission sets. With all the other types of things that we talked about today in the maturity models, bringing that together to ease the burden and deliver things at the speed of mission.
Yeah, a lot of exciting things happening. Jamison, thank you so much. We're unfortunately running out of time, so let me thank today's guest, Jamison Braun, the Vice President of Global Public Sector at Salesforce.
Thank you
again.
Anastasia.
I'm Anastasia Obis, and you're watching Federal News Network. Now let me send you back to the studio for more on the DoD Modernization Exchange.